Almost 2,000 years ago, God revealed this message to us through the Apostle John. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy, and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. You will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and in various places there will be famines and earthquakes. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And welcome back, everybody, to another edition of 10-Minute Theology. We're going to start a series on the 70 weeks of Daniel. Still talking about the end times, but boy, the key to prophecy. In fact, there's a few books written out there that refer to the book of Daniel as being the key to prophecy. This will be part one of multiple parts, but we're going to go through it and take a look at it because, boy, it really anchors in the timeline for us of the end times. So let's take a look, a reminder of our timeline of the last days. And one of the things we'll talk about too, don't forget, we're in the church age. And does the 70 weeks of Daniel prophesy about the church age? Does it prophesy about the rapture? Interesting subject, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on there, especially with all the attention being on the rapture today since we're in the month of September. So again, we're in the church age. I want to clear all the events off of here except our main timeline and the ones then that have to do with the 70 weeks of Daniel. So we have the 69 weeks at the beginning, which occurred before the church age. The 70th week of Daniel will come at the end. So after the church age, 70th week of Daniel is also referred to as the Tribulation. In common language, you will hear people use it to describe it, even though the Great Tribulation, which is spoken of in the Bible, is really the last 3.5 years of that 7-year tribulation. But that's okay. We'll get into those details as we go along. So let's go ahead and take a look at the verses. Only 4 verses, Daniel 9, 24 through 27, rich in content with each one, and just amazing amount of information is in this. So let's take a look at verse 24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people in your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. So right at the beginning here, let's talk about a couple things. One, 70 weeks. What are the weeks? If you were to look at the Hebrew, it actually says 77s. Some translations say weeks. Others say other things, but 77s is what it is. And don't forget that even in English, we have different terms to represent different times of years. We could talk about a decade, which is 10 years. We could talk about a century, which is 100 years, or a millennium, which is 1,000 years. In fact, there's an Old English term, fortnight, which actually is 14 days, which still is, you can commonly hear that sometimes today as well. So don't let the 70 weeks worry you. It's really 77. So 490 years have been decreed for your people and your holy city. Now, who is talking here? Who's your people? Well, this is the angel Gabriel, and he's talking to Daniel. So if he's saying to Daniel, your people and your holy city, well, who's Daniel's people? Daniel is Jewish, so his people are the Jewish people. What is their holy city? Their holy city is Jerusalem. And then there's 6 things, as you see in the list there, that these 70 weeks are for. You'll hear some people say that, hey, the 70 weeks, they're already concluded, and, there really is no millennium, and there's no real tribulation. We're actually in the millennium already, and it's part of the church age. And by the way, Israel has been replaced by the church. So you hear all these things. If the 70 weeks were finished, have you looked around recently? Does it look like there's been an end of sin out there? Does it look like we've brought in everlasting righteousness? Boy, I tell you, it sure doesn't look like it to me. So those are the things to consider as you at least consider verse 24. So let's take a look at verse 25. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks. In 62 weeks, it will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. So what are we getting at here? This tells us what kicks them off, okay? So you were to know that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, so that is the kickoff of the 70 weeks, until Messiah the Prince, Jesus, There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So it divides them up in here for a total of 69 weeks. Notice it says that it will be built again with the plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Okay, so there's 2 decrees that were issued to go rebuild part of Jerusalem. One we read about in Ezra. Both of these were by Artaxerxes, who was the king of Medo-Persia at the time. Remember, Medo-Persia conquered Babylon. Remember the writing on the wall, the incident with the writing on the wall? That was right before the Medo-Persian Empire came in and took over Babylon and kicked them out. And of course, Daniel had been deported, had been taken captive, carried away, if you want to call it, from Israel during the Babylonian captivity and destruction of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel earlier in time. So that's the period of time that we're looking at here. But regardless, 2 decrees, one given to Ezra, and he was allowed to go back and rebuild the temple. So you can read about that in the book of Ezra. The one that we want to focus on is it's important to be specific in the book of Nehemiah, because he was given permission to go back and rebuild the city and the walls. And notice how here in verse 25, it's very specific. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Built again with plaza and moat. Some translations say built again with streets and walls. Others say streets and moat, streets and ditches. Several different things, different translations occur. The emphasis here, though, is it's on the rebuilding of the city itself. Okay, and that's important because it matters for the timeline that goes in here for the 70 weeks. So we know that the 70 weeks start with a decree to go and restore and rebuild Jerusalem, the city. When do those 69 weeks come to an end? Messiah the Prince. What are we talking about with Messiah the Prince? Jesus Christ. Some people think that it was with his birth, but there was only one time throughout Jesus's ministry where he actually not only permitted the people to address him as the Messiah, but he also orchestrated it and planned it. And it was with the triumphal entry. So it's on Palm Sunday, as we think of today, the Sunday before Easter Sunday. When he came into Jerusalem, people were laying down palms, laying down their cloaks in the street as he walked in, and they even decreed Hosanna in the highest. And you can always tell when something's going on when they get it right, because the Pharisees were not happy, and they told Jesus that he should rebuke these people. And what did he say? He said, if they're quiet, even the rocks will cry out. So clearly this was a very significant event that was occurring. Why was it significant? Because it was bringing these 69 weeks to a close. Okay, let's go take a look at verse 26. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war, desolations are determined. So when these 69 weeks are over, the Messiah will be cut off. What's that mean? He was crucified. And notice it's after the 62 weeks. So already we have a gap. The 62 weeks ended with him, Jesus, coming into Jerusalem in the triumphal entry on Palm Sunday. Notice after that time, he was crucified and had nothing at that time when he was crucified. And then it goes on to say, the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. What city? We're still talking about Jerusalem. And notice here, it adds in the sanctuary, which is the temple. When did that happen? When was the city of Jerusalem and the temple destroyed again? It was in 70 AD after Jesus was crucified. So Jesus was crucified in 33 AD roughly. Fast forward 37 years, you get to 70 AD. And they destroyed the city and the sanctuary. And you say, well, okay, that's great. But don't keep in mind, I should say, do keep in mind that the account of the destruction of Jerusalem is just not a non-historical fact. In fact, Josephus wrote about it in his book, The Jewish War, and Tacitus wrote about it in his book, The Histories. There's several other ancient authors as well during that time who also wrote about it. So it's a well-documented event that occurred. Okay, so we already have a gap. That's the key here, is if the 69 weeks ended with the triumphal entry, already we have a gap, because we see after those 69 weeks are complete. The Messiah is cut off, and then Jerusalem is destroyed. So I want to emphasize the gap because it's important, and we'll see that when we bring the timeline back up. Okay, and he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. Who's the he? Well, the prince who is to come, back up in verse 26, is the Antichrist. Okay, notice the people of the prince who is to come, who are the ones who destroyed the city. Who were the people who destroyed the city? Who destroyed Jerusalem back in 70 AD? It was the Roman Empire. They'd had enough, finally, of everything that was going on there in Israel, and they said, we've had enough, and they leveled the city, essentially. Burned it to the ground, and it's recorded that even the gold melted off the temple, and of course, they tried to reclaim that. So, the he there is the Antichrist. In fact, since it's the people of the prince who is to come, if the prince who is to come is the Antichrist, that's why you hear a lot of people say that the Antichrist will come out of a revived Roman Empire. More on that in episodes down the road. But anyway, the Antichrist will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. What's that mean? Firm covenant. Some people call it a peace treaty. It doesn't specifically say that. It says a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. This is the 70th week. Who's the many? The many are the Jews. So the people of Israel, he makes a firm covenant with them for 1 week for 7 years. But in the middle of that week, so 3.5 years in, he puts a stop to the sacrifice and the grain offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until complete destruction. One that is decreed is poured out on the one who makes desolate. Read that, the one who is the destroyer. That would be the Antichrist, and also will be Satan. Now, a lot of information in this verse, and let's just give you a quick couple headlines here from it. Put a stop to the sacrifice and grain offerings. Keep in mind, from 70 AD until 1948, the nation of Israel no longer existed as a nation. Therefore, there was no nation of Israel for the Antichrist to make a firm covenant with. So the 70th week of Daniel could not have started before 1948. So that's one of the reasons that you'll hear a lot of people say that we are in the latter part of these last days. Notice also that it says he puts a stop to the sacrifice and grain offerings. Right now, there are no sacrifices going on in Israel. There is no temple, so there is no place that they can go make sacrifices to. But if you go look up on Google about the Temple Society over in Jerusalem, they're already planning that. They have plans for a temple. They're looking for the red heifer. That's a whole other subject too, for all the things that need to occur, but it's actively being discussed that they want to build another temple and they want to be able to start the sacrifices again, which again is just amazing. It shows where we sit within this timeline of the last days. Okay, I just popped the timeline back up here again, and as a quick reminder, so you see our major events up in the upper left there. The first 69 weeks of Daniel occurring before the church age kick off with a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. And you see the verses there, Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8. The triumphal entry then in Luke 19, 28 through 44 is a great place to read it. Jesus reminds them, and he's holding them accountable for not knowing the time of his visitation, which is fascinating, which goes back to this timeline, again, that they should have known. We read it in Daniel. Therefore, you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Don't forget that. So those tie together just in an amazing, amazing way. Of course, we have the church age in the middle, which where we currently sit, and we're that 70th week, the tribulation period, that just horrific last 7 years, which culminates after the church age, after the rapture of the church. It kicks off with the Antichrist making a firm covenant with Israel, as we read in Daniel 9:27. In the middle of that, we read about the abomination of desolation occurs, and that's where the Antichrist goes into the temple, stops the sacrifices, and basically declares himself as God. Daniel 9:27, and also in Matthew 24, you can go read about that. In the 70th week of Daniel, which also is again called the Tribulation, culminates with the second coming of Christ at the Battle of Armageddon. And as I mentioned before, boy, it's not much of a battle. In fact, if you read it in Revelation 19 there, 11 to 19, basically it says that he speaks a word and the battle is over, because people forget he's God. And how does the created have a right to say anything to the creator? So don't forget that. It is a very short battle indeed. Of course, that ushers in the millennium, and then off we go into eternity future at the end of those 1,000 years. So, quick conclusion on part 1. 70 weeks of Daniel began with the decree of Artaxerxes, as detailed in Nehemiah 2, 1 through 8, to rebuild Jerusalem's walls and city. Key point, Jerusalem's walls and city. The 69th week concludes with Jesus riding into Jerusalem at the triumphal entry. The gap between the 69th week and the start of the 70th week is the church age, which is just absolutely astounding when you think about it. The 70th week starts with the Antichrist making a firm covenant with Israel after the church age is over. What concludes the church age? Again, the rapture of the church. The catching away, the supernatural catching away of the church from this world by Jesus Christ himself. Will be absolutely an amazing event. And don't forget, I'm not saying it's happening in September, but you get all this anticipation in September every year because people think the rapture of the church. They tie it back to the Feast of the Trumpets. If you want to know more about that, go watch the previous episode, and you get more details about that. Especially go back 2 episodes as well, and we go into that in a good detailed way also. The middle of the 70th week, 3.5 years in, is the abomination of desolation. Again, that's when the Antichrist goes into the temple, stops the sacrifices, and basically declares himself as God. Again, the 70th week, commonly called the 7-year tribulation, referred to in the Bible, at least the last 3.5 years of it, as the Great Tribulation, because the whole 7-year period is absolutely going to be horrific, but the last 3.5 years is where God's wrath is really poured out upon the evil that's in this world. So that will bring us to an end again of another episode of 10-Minute Theology. So again, 70 weeks of Daniel, only part 1. We'll hit a couple more parts with these. Look forward to addressing it to you. Have a great week, and we will talk to you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye now.